The film opens with a bloodied and terrified priest slowly making his way across an ancient battlefield, the ground littered with the bodies of thousands of dead soldiers. Reaching the corpse of another priest, he tries to take a small idol of the head of the demon Pazuzu, an ancient artifact, from the dead priest's hand, only for the corpse to briefly come back to life and stop him from taking it. The camera pulls back to reveal the entire valley is littered with dead soldiers, many of whom have been crucified upside down. Cutting to Cairo, Egypt in 1949. We meet a young Father Lancaster Merrin, who has taken a sabbatical from the church and devoted himself to history and archaeology. As he struggles with his shattered faith, he is haunted by an incident in a village during World War II, where he served as parish priest. Near the end of the war, a sadistic Nazi SS commander forced Merrin to participate in arbitrary executions in order to save a full village from slaughter. Merrin is approached by a collector named Semelier, who invites him to join a British excavation in Kenya. The dig excavates a Christian Byzantine-era church built before Christianity had reached that region of Africa. Semelier reveals that the British are searching for a relic, and he wants Lancaster to find it before them. Merrin agrees and travels to the dig site. He soon arrives at the British Army headquarters, where the soldiers remind him about the war. He then meets Major Granville, who tells him that the excavation is in Durati. He is joined by Father Francis, a Vatican scholar who was reassigned from his original task to do missionary work in East Africa in order to ensure the church is not desecrated. Francis addresses Lancaster as a priest, so Lancaster corrects him since he's no longer one. Upon arriving at the site with their translator and guide Chuma, Merrin also meets the chief excavator, a brutish man named Jeffries with visible boils on his face, and Sarah Novak, a doctor who spent time in a concentration camp during World War II and is haunted by her experiences. Lancaster sees a graveyard, so Chuma explains that it's because of the plague that happened years ago. Lancaster asks about the site's status, and Jeffries reveals that the church is in pristine condition, but no one would enter. When asked why, Jeffries just leaves. Curious, Lancaster asks about Jeffries' scars, so Sarah speculates that it's an infection. In addition, Merrin learns that the diggers are disappearing or leaving in droves because the local tribesmen fear the church is cursed. He then notices hyenas roaming around, and Chuma states that they've been around since they began digging. Merrin witnesses a digger inexplicably experience a seizure, and a confused Sarah asks Merrin what he wants to uncover. He shares that he wants to know why a church was built years before Christianity arrived. Francis then introduces Imekwe, who's donating his hotel room for the mission school. Merrin, Chuma, and Francis visit the dig site and find only the dome uncovered. The rest of the church is buried beneath the earth. Merrin discovers that the church is in perfect condition, as though it had been buried immediately after its construction was completed. The three enter the church through the dome and find the place in near pristine condition, but note two disturbing oddities. The statues of the angels holding weapons point their spears downward instead of the conventional method of either having no weapons or point them triumphantly toward heaven, and display includes a patchwork of Lucifer. The second disturbing discovery is that someone has vandalized the church by ripping the enormous crucifix from its place on the altar and suspending it with Christ on the cross in an upside-down position, which is considered a desecration. Merrin and Francis deduced the sculptors were trying to depict the angels restraining something that was beneath the church. Determined to learn more about the archaeological dig, Francis asks for an inventory of the items found in the church, so Chuma suggests that lead archaeologist Monsieur Beshan would know. However, Sarah tells Merrin that Beshan went insane 3 weeks earlier and was transferred to a mental hospital in Nairobi. Merrin visits Beshan's tent at the dig site and sees dozens of drawings of the same demon artifact the collector had asked Merrin to find, which happens to be the head of Pazuzu. As he reaches for it, he accidentally cuts his palm on a glass shard. In her room, Sarah does tarot reading, where she gets the Death, the Tower, and the Devil cards. She shuffles the deck and gets the same reading just before Merrin arrives. While cleaning his wound, Sarah reveals that Beshan had no symptoms before his mental breakdown. Lancaster assumes this is why the Turkana fear the church is cursed. Lancaster then notices Sarah's tattoo, so she shares how her family hid from the tyrants but someone turned them in, so they were sent to a prison camp. Meanwhile, Francis prays when his cross suddenly turns upside down. This scares Francis, so he writes it up and leaves, only for the cross to turn again afterward. Next day, Marin travels to Nairobi to visit Beshan at the St. John's Sanitarium. Lancaster asks where he saw the relic from his drawing, but the man just laughs. The door suddenly closes, and blood drips on the floor. Marin discovers that Beshan has carved a swastika on his chest and is speaking through demonic possession in the voice of the sadistic SS commander who tormented Marin during the war. As he registers these events, Beshan slashes his own throat. After saying he was free, Father Gianetti, warden of the asylum, speculates that Beshan was not possessed, but rather touched by a demon, which drove him mad and eventually to suicide. Marin is very skeptical, but before he returns to the dig site, Gianetti gives him the volume of Roman rituals to use in exorcism. Although Marin claims he will never use them, upon returning to the village, strange events continue. James is killed by hyenas that seem to continuously stalk the dig. Night and day, his younger brother, Joseph, collapses after watching his brother get ripped to pieces. At the clinic, Sarah checks Joseph's condition. Francis points out that the hyenas ignored Joseph, acting as if he wasn't there. That night, Sarah reads when the wind blows off her papers. She closes her window, but notices something moving behind her. Holding a weapon, she walks to Joseph's room and sees him sitting on the floor, caressing something underneath a cloth. She removes the cloth and finds James' decapitated head. Sarah gasps as she wakes up from the nightmare. To her surprise, she finds Jeffries beside her. He berates her for throwing away the necklace he gave her, but she defends that she lost it. Still, Jeffries blurts out that if she could only cure his face, he may look good to her. Joseph then enters the room and says, "He's coming for you," worried. Sarah approaches Joseph and comforts him. Later, Lancaster checks on Joseph and sees a lesion on his chest. Sarah assures him that it's asymptomatic, but she can't figure out the source. She asks him about Beshan, so he reveals that he's dead. Sarah cries as she feels useless, so Lancaster hugs her in comfort and they kiss. Suddenly, blood flows into Joseph's IV bag and the bed moves. When Lancaster checks on the boy, he begins convulsing, so Sarah checks his vital signs until he stops. Meanwhile, the local chief's wife gives birth to a stillborn baby who is covered in maggots. Around the same time, Marin discovers a passageway leading to a cave underneath the church that houses an ancient pagan temple with the statue of the demon Pazuzu. He also finds evidence that this temple was used to conduct human sacrifices. Upon his return, he sees the local tribe cremate the stillborn baby. This makes Marin suspicious because there are stories of an epidemic that wiped out an entire village in the valley 50 years earlier. He had been told that the dead were buried in a graveyard just outside the valley. When he digs up one of the graves of the supposed victims of this plague, it is found to be empty. Jeffries breaks into the bar and tries to reach for a beer. However, the doors suddenly slam shut and he screams. As he sleeps later, Lancaster dreams of the atrocities during the war. He then wakes up just as Francis barges into his room. They go to the bar where they find the bloody mess, which they believe is Jeffries' remains. Francis also mentions that the wife of Chief Sebituana gave birth to a stillborn, and the Turkana blames them for it. Francis believes that they're planning an uprising, so he contacts Granville to send help, but Lancaster thinks soldiers are not the solution. Before leaving, Lancaster finds Sarah's necklace on the floor. Granville and the troops soon arrive in Durrati. They believe that the Turkana are responsible for Jeffrey's death, so they plot to assume control until the excavation is secure. Marin confronts Father Francis about what he found, and Francis reveals to him the history of the Durrati Valley and the real reason he was sent there. A great army led by 2 priests came to the valley searching for the origin of evil 1,500 years prior. When they arrived in the valley, the evil presence consumed them, and one killed the other. When the lone surviving priest made it back, Emperor Justinian ordered a church be built over the site, specifically the pagan temple, and then buried to seal the evil force inside of it. Father Francis reveals to Marin that the builders of the church never meant it to be recorded in Vatican documents. However, a vague reference to it was recorded and found in 1893. 4 priests subsequently came to Durrati and enlisted the local tribe to help them. All of the tribesmen and the priests disappeared. The Vatican then ordered that the false graveyard be built, and stories of a plague spread around to keep people away from the valley, while the British happened to stumble upon the site. Francis then reveals that the Vatican sent him to see if the legend was true. When Marin asks about the legend, Francis reveals that it is believed that the valley in Durati was the traditional spot of Lucifer's fall after the war in heaven. Francis believes that the devil is in Joseph, since the Turkana attempted to exorcise him, nearly killing the boy. He asks Lancaster's help, but he refuses to believe in such stories. Later, Chuma and Lancaster drive to the site and find Granville marching to the church's entrance that's been uncovered. As they enter, they find Geoffrey's body hanging in the center. Still convinced that the Turkana did this, Granville seeks vengeance. He marches into the tribe and shoots their leader, erupting chaos. Soon, the troops prepare for battle, yet Granville notices blood on his hands and a dead crow on his desk instead of a butterfly. Having gone mad, Granville shoots himself. Lancaster soon arrives at the clinic and tells Francis that they must take Joseph away. However, a sandstorm prevents them from leaving, so Francis suggests hiding him in the church where the Turkana won't enter. Lancaster then hands him the book for exorcism, while he stays behind to find Sarah. The sandstorm envelopes the area, limiting the visibility while the tribe chants. Still, Francis arrives at the church and lays Joseph to perform an exorcism. Meanwhile, Lancaster heads into Sarah's bedroom, where he sees an occult symbol drawn on the wall in blood. He also sees the relic, so he grabs it. He then notices a wedding photo, discovering that Beshan was Sarah's husband. With this, he figures out that she went into the church with Beshan. Therefore, she's the one possessed, not Joseph. At the church, a possessed Sarah attacks and kills Francis. Outside the clinic, Chuma gets stabbed by a tribesman, killing him. As the battle between soldiers and tribesmen ensues, Lancaster goes to the church, but finds Francis and Joseph gone. Desperate, Lancaster prays to the Lord, begging for forgiveness while marking his forehead with holy water. He then sees Joseph on the tomb, while Sarah stands at the crucifix. Possessed by Pazuzu, Marin has the demon exorcised from her. Joseph walks away noticeably, but Sarah ends up dying. Father Marin and Joseph emerge from the church, once again buried in sand, and history has repeated itself. Everyone at the site was killed by an evil presence from the church, except for one priest. Now, only Father Marin and the little boy are left as the British soldiers and the local tribes have annihilated each other. Marin returns to Rome and meets with Semelier at a cafe, explaining he was unable to find the relic. Semelier replies, "But you found something, didn't you?" As he leaves, Marin is revealed to be wearing a collar and is now a priest again, having regained his faith in God after defeating the demon with holy exorcism rituals.